Classic Army is back with a vengeance in this episode of the Gear Guide. You know, for those of us who've been playing for a while, we all remember Classic Army's rise to power in the airsoft world around the mid-2000s. But unfortunately in the early 2010s, well, they kind of nearly went extinct. Well, consider 2014 the year of Jurassic Park, and they are back. And they brought a ton of new tricks with them as well. Now I mentioned tricks, but outside is not really where you're gonna find too many of these tricks, at least not the apparent ones. At first glance, this is pretty much a bog standard M4. Plastic handguard, plastic grip, plastic stock, and metal body. I mean, it's a solid offering, but there's nothing flashy or special about it until you go to drop the battery in the front handguard and you realize, hey, they didn't front wire this thing, it's all rear wired now. If you ever want to put a rail in this thing or make any upgrades, that's a fantastic touch. Plus, with the weight of the batteries, it's nice to have it in the back so it stays balanced and the weight is toward your shoulder. And the plastic they use, really it's more of a polymer, and you definitely can tell it's fiber reinforced. They really stepped it up even on the grip. They're using kind of the same polymer around all of it. But aside from that, everything else on this gun is metal, and on top of that metal are some fantastic Colt trademarks and fire selector markings on both sides of the receiver, plus a unique serial number. So all that lends to a very nice aesthetic appeal, and we all know trademarks, let's face it, you may not think it, but they do matter. And you know, anybody can do a metal body, but this one is pretty darn solid. There's not a hint of wobble in this thing. We want to know, is this thing all show and no go, or is there more under the hood that's gonna make this thing stand out? So the only way to find out is to tear this sucker apart. So that's what I did. I immediately started ripping this thing apart, and the first thing I noticed was wiring. Gone to the days of the old Classic Army silicone coated wiring. And if you guys know, if you ever worked in an older CA, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That wire would shred if you looked at it the wrong way or if you caught it on any sharp metal edge. That's gone. They use a silver strand wire now and a really thin but tough clear coating on it. And actually I kind of got snagged on a few of the pieces of metal when I was taking it apart, and it didn't so much as even nick it, which is awesome. So this is really gonna hold up in comparison to the Classic Army wiring of old. And if they stopped right there, I would have been a happy camper, but they kept going. As soon as I cracked that mech box open, I saw a ton of changes. The few things I noticed that seemed to be the same are the gear set. They looked almost like the Classic Army gears of yesteryear, which is good because they are really pretty darn good gears that come in a Classic Army gun. And the piston, the iconic yellow piston of Classic Army, is still the same, but they went with an aluminum ported piston head versus the old plastic ones, which is a great upgrade. And walking back down the air system, they changed the cylinder head to an anodized aluminum blue one, which is a big upgrade to match the bore up cylinder system as well. So you actually have a little bit larger cylinder diameter, so you have a little more air, especially great if you're going to be doing any big upgrades. And to top that air system off all around, they went with an air seal nozzle, which was a fantastic touch. In doing the old finger test on the mech box, this thing sealed up really well and I couldn't get it to leak one bit. Classic Army gears have always been great, like I said, and fortunately they stuck with that, but they had to make a few more changes too to really up their game, and they went with 9mm bearing bushings to keep those gears moving well. And shimming looked really good too. I didn't see any trouble. There's really no play in the gears when I had this thing apart either. So they're actually taking their time and doing some shimming work inside of the mech box. And the big news out of everything here is the quick change spring system, which allows you to make those fast spring swaps without having to crack the mech box open. You still have to tear the gun down, you still have to get the mech box out, but you don't have to rip everything apart to make that spring change. And that's a big thing considering when you see what our Chrono readings were. We loaded the included metal high cap with our .2 gram Elite Force test BBs, and we were seeing an impressive 420 FPS on the Chrono with very little fluctuation, just a couple up and down. Now I know what you're thinking, this is gonna be over most of your guys' field limits, but remember that quick change spring system? Well, that's it. You can actually get in here, and if you need to, chop a couple rungs off that spring that's included, or just put a little softer spring in here to get it back down to whatever your limits are. But if you're lucky enough to have higher field limits and you guys are doing it safely, this is ready to go, especially for those outdoor engagements. Rate of fire was also good, just under 22 rounds a second on a 20C 11 1V LiPo, and that's probably due to the high torque Classic Army motor they included in the build, making quick work of that stiff spring, where other factory motors might not have been able to get this level rate of fire at that high of an FPS. Accuracy was also impressive as well, and that's probably thanks to the 603mm type bore barrel that it comes with the gun and the one-piece metal hop-up, up, we had really no issues hitting our target standing at 75 feet using the iron sights on this AEG. And once we put in the 0.28 gram heavier BBs for our test, we were really drilling this thing well. This thing is definitely ready for outdoor skirmishing out of the box. Overall, we really like the gun, and our only improvement suggestion would be to do a tooth modification on the stock Classic Army piston to prevent potential engagement issues due to higher rate of fire. If you plan on dialing this thing down in FPS, you're probably gonna see a jump in that rate of fire, especially if you're using a bigger battery. You know, many of the newer guns are actually shipping with pistons that already have this mod done to it, so it'd be a nice touch if CA could incorporate it in a future build, but it's definitely not a deal breaker here at all. We didn't have any trouble, and after our test, we actually did the teardown. We didn't see anywhere on that piston whatsoever. And what makes this gun really great is the price tag. $225 MSRP for what you get internally on this thing with the new mech box, the new build, the new finishes, everything under the hood. That is a great value for the dollar. So if you're looking for a beefed up AEG that has some serious power, tons of upgrades under the hood, but won't break your bank, check out the new Classic Army M4s, and you can pick them up anywhere Spartan Imports products are sold. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on Classic Army's return? Have you guys been playing for a while? I mean, if you've been out there a bunch, you know what CA was back in the day, or are you new to the sport and CA is a new brand? This is kind of one of the first times you're really seeing Classic Army M4s here in a video and a review. And I want to hear what you think about this gun coming at 420 FPS out of the box. Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think I'd rather have it upgraded so you can bring it back down, especially with that quick change spring system? Or would you rather see a gun that's coming out of the box at like 375 or maybe right under 400 FPS so you don't have to do that work? We'd love to know what you think right below. Well, that's it for this episode of the Gear Guide. Guys, I'll be back in the next episode where I review a brand new AEG made entirely of Play-Doh. Just don't eat it. It's non-toxic, but it's still not tasty.